Shall we crash onwards then?
Yes, let's.
If we must. Yes, so speaking of ironically watching bad films, that's basically Showgirls raison d'etre at this point.
Oh, that it rose to that. Wouldn't that be nice? One of the interesting things about Verhoeven's 1995 film Showgirls, like Basic Instinct from a Joe Esterhazy script, is the cultural mindshare that it attained, and to a degree still has. And just let me check. Yes, that is the only interesting thing about it. This story... Oh, I guess that'll have to do. This story of a troubled young woman who heads to the world's tawdriest city in order to chase her dream of being a dancer and finds that, shockingly, it's not what she imagined, has become a cult classic of sorts, and prompted such scintillating debate as, is it so bad it's good? Or rather, is it deliberately bad? Or is it just unintentionally bad? The answer, of course, is it's irrelevant, since the salient point is that it's just bad. Very, very bad. So bad it's nigh on unwatchable. And while the whole so bad it's good thing might fly for the likes of Amir Shervan or David Pryor, Paul Verhoeven is a real filmmaker who knows how to put a film together. It was derided at the time of its release as both bad and vulgar, the latter being something with which I have, like a bankrupt haulage firm, no truck, criticisms of vulgarity tending to carry with them intimations of a prudish and puritanical, not to mention hypocritical mindset. But I find the appropriate words instead to be crass and cynical, while leaving some room for vapid. The whole film screams that it's provocative for the sake of being provocative, and it has nothing of substance to say at all. The troubled young woman is saved by the Bella Luminous Elizabeth Berkley and her character of Nomi Malone, a spectacularly unlikable, ungrateful and selfish moron, who is less a woman with a chip on her shoulder than a walking chip with shoulders, whom we meet hitchhiking on the side of the road. Within moments of being picked up by a driver, she's changing his radio to another station and brandishing a knife at him. While possession of a knife may be a sensible precaution, the scene is only the first of many in which Nomi shows a spectacular lack of gratitude for the help she's almost entirely dependent on for most of the film. She soon arrives in Las Vegas, and looking, as she does throughout the film, every bit as gaudy and ugly as that city, with the open-mouthed, vacant-eyed look of an inflatable party doll, Miss Berkley should have been well suited to a film that treats its heroine like a shiny new toy, as she was described by Janet Maslin of the New York Times, something which is itself perhaps some kind of attempt at a statement, as her makeup is notably different from any other woman in the film, and Berkley's not an ugly woman. In Las Vegas, and while still looking ugly, she will luck into a place to stay, but be ungrateful, luck into an audition for a popular dance show, and be extremely ungrateful, get used and abused by men around her, including Kyle MacLachlan with the hair of an absolute tit, and risk a fellow dancer's life, and certainly endanger her livelihood, in order to get ahead. Her friend will also, for no additional value to the story that I can see, be brutally gang raped in a house full of people, but have no police involvement, and in retaliation for which Nomi will beat up one of the men responsible. Something incidentally seen in less detail than the rape, as if that is somehow commensurate with the crime. Despite working as a lap and pole dancer at a strip club, Nomi will become shocked and upset about being asked to strip to her audition, an audition for an attraction that she knows is a topless dance show. She will later become jealous about a man whom she physically assaulted, and yet who still bailed her out of jail, but that she otherwise doesn't have a relationship with, in a scene that portrays her as impossibly dim, seeing the engagement ring on his fiance's finger, but not, seemingly, understanding it until he himself tells her that they're getting married, at which point she gets sad. And all of this will be accompanied by, to return to Janet Maslin again, whose review tickled me, the soul-numbing stupidity that plagues Mr. Esterhazy's dialogue. The whole thing is a miserable experience, before ending in a stupid and highly improbable manner that presumably is meant to give some closure to Nomi, who clearly doesn't deserve it. The entire film feels like it's some kind of great joke on Verhoeven's part. But if it is, it's not funny. Berkeley's acting is woefully, laughably bad. From her pathetic and regular flouncing temper tantrums that a toddler given to the dramatic might think were a bit much, to her orgasms by way of epileptic fit, and, curiously for a character who's a dancer, her complete lack of ability at dancing. We've seen in Total Recall that Verhoeven can get a good performance out of actors with limited range, and he certainly understands character and story, and that films should probably have them. So how did we end up with this? You might argue over the effectiveness of it, but it's usually possible to argue that Verhoeven's excesses and provocations have a purpose. But that's not so in Showgirls. It's a button-pushing, boundary-challenging exercise that seems to exist just to push buttons. It's full, though not as full as press and reputation might lead you to suspect, of nudity and sex, but it is perhaps the least erotic or titillating thing that I have ever seen. Thing that I've seen that is supposed to be erotic or titillating. I mean, I'm not comparing it to The Beach Assault and Saving Private Ryan or anything. The last couple of years has seen 2 documentaries made about Showgirls, and an entirely baffling reappraisal of it as some sort of ahead of its time proto-Me Too piece, which is, frankly, bananas. I remind you that this was written by Joe Esterhaz, writer of Basic Instinct and Sliver, whose general introspection and insight can be well illustrated by his quote that, "I was a militant smoker, and in my case, I think I particularly used smoking because of what I felt was a kind of politically correct big brother assault on smoking. This is a stinking turd of a film, and isn't even ironically enjoyable. Just say no."
Once again, the curse of Escher House rearing its head again. Yeah, this is a film that I'm only glad exists because some of the dialogue around it is interesting and funny. The film itself is garbage. It's not even so bad it's good. It's just so bad it's bad. I'm sort of glad it exists purely, as I say, because of the facts that you can dredge up from around it, like the actual professional dancers that you had as part of the cast being told to dance deliberately badly, so that the lead wouldn't look so bad by comparison. It's just not very good. It's not very good in the slightest. It's just absolute drivel. And I agree with what you're saying. It doesn't really have any kind of purpose behind it, and all the other ones, certainly the films we've spoken about before, like Robocop, Total Recall, you can kind of see, even if it's a silly premise, it's well executed and there's some point behind it. This one, it's not particularly well executed and there does not appear to be any point behind it. And yeah, so it's the worst of all worlds, really. As I say, some of the reappraisal is baffling to me. I've seen some defences that maybe in the abstract I can kind of agree with, seeing it's like in antithesis to the likes of A Star Is Born. It's showing more of the kind of arguably more realistic, gritty underside to the world of stardom and all that kind of stuff. But even if you grant that as being correct, and I don't, but even if you did, it's still a very bad film with very bad acting and appalling dance numbers in a film that's supposed to be about dancing. No, it's just not good. This one I did definitely watch a few years, well, I say a few years back. It's probably about a decade and a half back at this point. But yes, I had no interest really in returning to it, but it seems like the kind of film that we should talk about if we're talking about his Verhoeven's Hollywood era, because it obviously was a colossal clanger for obvious reasons, and it's took a bit of shine off his career, and frankly, rightly so. There's just not really anything to commend or excuse this film. Really, it's garbage.
Yeah, it's just kind of offensively bad, and tasteless, and yeah, I hadn't seen this before. I'd been aware of it ever since it came out, and I remember the press around it at the time, but I'd never actually seen it, and I watched it now. It was a real struggle to get through this. It's so bad. I don't think Elizabeth Berkley's that bad an actor. Around the same time, she had a very small role, but she was in Any Given Sunday, and she was passable enough in that, and certainly looked like an attractive woman, not the strange sort of Well, as that one for the New York Times said, some sort of sex doll in this with her terrible makeup the whole time. But again, it stands out because the other women in it, Gina Gershon, for instance, even when they're on the stage where their makeup is necessarily like much heavier, don't look like Elizabeth Berkley looks like in just our off days.
Yes.
So I don't know why she's made up in the way she is, and so part of it you think it's partly intentional, but her acting, it's up there for worst I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's like all histrionic all the time. It's so grating. Yeah.
Little tantrum. When that woman, for some reason, decides to help her at the start, who becomes her roommate later, and buys her lunch or dinner, and she just like starts throwing an entire bottle of ketchup over her fries and having a wee tantrum. And the film's full of that, and that's basically her entire action style for everything. Apart from later on when she's pretending to have an orgasm, like I say, she sounds or looks like she's having an epileptic fit.
Yeah.
It's so bad that you feel like it's kind of deliberate, but then like, to what end would that be? And I don't believe so. And why she's the one person in the film that's that bad.
Yeah.
And yeah, of all the people that are available to cast in this role, I'm sure there's a huge number of people who can actually dance.
Yeah.
Where she just stomps across the stage and moves in the most unerotic and arrhythmic manner you can possibly imagine. Which is why, like, for the first, perhaps third of the film, I really thought it was some sort of like meta film that was like just some like tremendous piss take. That there was some sort of point, and by the end of it, it's like, oh no, it's just garbage.
I've seen that defence come up. I think it might even have been from Verhoeven himself, maybe, or maybe it was Esterhaus. I forget which one, but one of them was saying it. But it sounds a lot like the defence of the what was it, that Trolls film? It's that kind of idea. It's like they just made something awful and are trying to style it out and claim it as being a victory, where it was in fact an absolute defeat. So yes.
Yeah, it's every bit as convincing as no, parsecs, it is a measure of time because it's about how well you can use your navigational computer. Yes, George.
Yes.
And you too, Paul. Shush now. Yeah, and like the really weird like reappraisal recently, some sort of proto-Me Too thing. That's mental.
Yes.
What are you talking about? I mean, even if like the film in any way supported that, which it doesn't, do you really think that Joe Esterhazy is capable of that? Do one. Oh no, it's so awful. Oh, it is quite comfortably one of the worst things I've ever seen.
Yes. Yes.
Feel like for something that's an actual real film. You know, again, it's not like
money and talent behind it. Yes, it's not.
Yeah, it's not Hollywood Cop or something, or Samurai Cop. You know, where like the director has no idea what they're doing, and it doesn't have like, you know, actual professional actors in it or anything like that. It's like no, and coming from someone who made RoboCop and Total Recall, it's just how, why, what? It's so bad. But there's absolutely no. There's no ironic viewing potential. It's just bad.
Yeah.
And it kind of baffles me that this became a sort of a Trolls-like film and a kind of midnight movie kind of thing with this cult following. It's like, I think you're trying too hard here.
Yes.
It's not entertainingly good. It's just entertainingly bad. It's just bad.
Yes, I and my liver can no longer tolerate the amount of vodka that would be required to make this film funny. So no, just say no, kids. Just say no.
Yep, do one.